Hey guys, how are we? So today I'm going to be chatting about everything that we need to know about fat loss. What are the most important things from a nutrition and lifestyle perspective that we can look at with our clients to make sure that we're optimizing and making the fat loss process as easy as possible. So just starting with a quick little overview. So weight loss requires a negative energy balance. We need to be in a deficit, a calorie deficit in order to achieve fat loss. And when weight loss isn't occurring, all it indicates is that the individual isn't in a calorie deficit once we give things enough time. So sometimes it takes a little bit of a time for scale weight to actually come down, even though an individual has been in a calorie deficit. So helping clients understand that sometimes we're just waiting for this whoosh where body weight or scale weight can be really, really stubborn and it can hold and hold and hold for 4, 5, 6 days. And then all of a sudden the individual has a good sleep or something like that. And then boom, we get the change in the scale weight. But scale weight, if you're going to be using it with your clients, it is going to be the most accurate predictor of weight loss and an individual being in a deficit for the most part. So if an individual isn't losing weight and they're in a calorie deficit, it means that they're not in a calorie deficit. So something has went wrong in the calculation or in the accuracy of the application. So either that individual is not tracking their food correctly, so they're tracking sauces and stuff like that, or they're using the wrong food groups, and their accuracy in tracking in MyFitnessPal or Chronometer is off, or the individual has overestimated the amount of calories that they burn throughout the day. They've overestimated how active they are. When calories and protein are held consistent, it doesn't really matter what we do with carbohydrates and fats when it comes to weight loss, except there is a couple of considerations that we want to make around satiety and adherence. And something else that's really important is you don't need to have your clients weighing out and tracking their foods. There's plenty of other methods that we can approach that we're going to chat about now in this lecture. So as we've previously discussed, there's multiple things that make up the energy balance equation. So our energy intake is the calories that we consume through food, and this is affected by our appetite and environment, our ability to absorb nutrients, the palatability of foods, and our headspace, or how our psychology is. And then for energy expenditure, so we have basal metabolic rate, so that's the amount of calories that we burn completely at rest, and just to keep like normal physiological functions going. Through exercise, through non-exercise activity thermogenesis, so the calories that we burn when we're fidgeting and stuff like that. And then the thermic effect of feeding, which is the amount of calories that it takes in order to digest and assimilate nutrients. So, for example, protein has the highest thermic effect of feeding, and something that we're going to chat about in more depth now. So I think an important place to start is to look at the role that the brain plays in regulating energy consumption. So we have two primary pathways. So this is in the accurate nucleus of the hypothalamus in the brain. And we have anorexigenic neurons and orexigenic neurons. So anorexigenic neurons suppress appetite and the orexigenic neurons increase appetite. So the brain is receiving feedback from levels of ghrelin in the gut, from some of the incretin hormones that our gut produces as we're digesting food. From the pancreas, we're receiving feedback, like even like increases in levels of like insulin will send signals back to the brain to regulate energy intake, and then leptin. So I previously discussed leptin in one of the lectures and I misspoke on it. So what I had said is that when body fat levels come down, leptin goes up. That's actually incorrect. So leptin tracks body fat levels really tightly. So increases in body fat increases leptin, and that is anorexigenic, so that suppresses appetite. And then when we lose body fat, leptin levels come down and that increases body fat. So there's multiple ways that the gut and the brain are speaking with each other in order to regulate the amount of food that we are consuming, or the amount of calories that we're consuming. And something else that's worth considering as well is one of the big feedbacks to the brain is about gut distension. So it's the food volume that we consume, or the energy density of the meals, and the more that our stomach volume is distended, that also sends feedback to the brain in acute environments. So in short-term environments, when we get that gut distension, that suppresses appetite. So we've previously spoken about homeostatic and non-homeostatic mechanisms of controlling appetite. What we're looking at here these are our kind of homeostatic mechanisms, and we have acute and prolonged homeostatic mechanisms. So our prolonged ones, or our longer term ones, would be things like our leptin levels, and the acute ones are the feedback that we receive after a meal, which are things like ghrelin levels and the incretin hormones and our gut distension. And as I said, leptin is more of a longer term signal that regulates appetite or behaviors around food. So something that we know that's really important for fat loss is getting adequate protein intake, particularly when an individual is resistance training and we want to make sure that we're continuously driving adaptations of strength and hypertrophy. If we're looking for that body composition change, which is going to be the case with most of our clients that we're working with, they don't just want to lose weight, they want to change how they look. So increasing an individual's muscle mass is really important for doing that. So we know that protein is highly satiating. This could be driven by its calorie density. It could be driven by the texture of the food. So there's the time taken for it to chew and the feeling and the sensation of chewing down on it. That seems to be relevant, but that could just be tracking the time it takes for us to digest it. And then so protein has 4 calories per gram, and as opposed to like dietary fat has 8 calories per gram or 9 calories per gram. It's in and around there. It has a higher thermic effect of feeding. So when we consume protein, 20 to 30% of the calories in that are used to absorb the amino acids into our bloodstream, as opposed to carbohydrates and fats. So carbohydrates are the thermic effect of feeding is 5 to 10%, and dietary fat is quite low, it's 0 to 3%. As a general recommendation for fat loss, I think getting protein up towards that 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight or above that is a relatively safe shout. Now, there's nothing inherently special, or I don't believe there's anything inherently special about like specific amino acids and the signaling that they have. It's more so tracking the energy density and the texture of foods. And we know that the protein package matters. So it's not helpful to just be like, yes, all of the time protein is always super satiating. It's a safe enough general heuristic, but it doesn't pan out on an individual food level. If we look at this prospective cohort study, which is a type of like observational research, and where we look at individual food groups or individual sources of protein and how they affect body weight regulation and weight changes over time. So we see that the kind of fattier cuts of meats, so hamburgers or even like lean hamburger here, hot dog, pork, bacon, chicken with skin, like they are seeming to increase body weight, as opposed to when we come down here and we look at other sources, we see things like seafood and leaner chicken and plain or artificially sweetened yogurt, which are like decent sources of protein, but they're also relatively low in fat, which is decreasing the calorie density of them. So using this graph, I think, is a nice depiction of what's going on when it comes to fat, when it comes to protein. It's not the fact that protein is uniquely satiating. It depends on the protein package and what else is in the food that also contains protein. So what's best when it comes to fat loss? Should we be doing meal plans, if it fits your macros, mindful eating, or plate methods? And the answer is all of them, to a certain extent. We're not allowed to prescribe a meal plan for individuals because we're not dietitians. But what we can do is sit down with an individual and help them to plan out their own meals. And something I like to do is have a nice mix of both, because having a meal plan, it takes out the decision fatigue, but it also is simultaneously like more restrictive. So using a mixture of both is actually probably where the sweet spot is. So let's say for the first 3 meals an individual has a day, it's going to be structured. So Monday to Friday, they're going to have 3 meals in a meal plan like format. So meal 1, so breakfast, lunch, snack, and then when they're at home in the evening, then doing some form of like calorie tracking. That's a really nice method that I like. And then same on the weekend as well, just giving them some calories to hit as opposed to them having to follow a super strict meal plan. And I find that that's something that works best, is having the 3 staple meals of a meal plan that they put together with you. So it's not that you're prescribing them a meal plan, because we're not registered to do that, but working with that individual so they can map out like, okay, well, I usually have this, and this for lunch, or this for breakfast, this for lunch, and this is for a snack. And then we come in and look at like, okay, how can we modify the energy density of these meals? How can we get the individual to get in some more fruit and veg here, some higher protein here? And then we have a meal plan like structure. And I quite like doing that, where you have that degree of flexibility where they can eat what they want in the evening and have it fit their macros in the evening. But we reduce the decision fatigue that they're going to be experiencing by having set like some like 3 meals that they don't have to be always weighing out everything and stuff like that. Like when they're in work and stuff like that, it's nice to have that bit of structure. Now, another way that we could approach this is we could do a meal template and some mindful eating in there. So explaining like what mindful eating is to a client and how they might approach it during work and how they want to be present with their meals and not be scrolling social media or watching Netflix whilst they're eating, and explaining how when we do that, we slow down the rate in which we eat, that it increases the satiety with meals, and that can lead to better fat loss. And if we were to use the plate method, where an individual has like the plate is split into quarters or thirds, and there's a decent serving of vegetables there, a small serving of fat, a decent serving of protein, and a relatively small serving of carbohydrate. What we can do is, if we use the plate method and some mindful eating where they take their time with it and they're nice and present, that's also extremely effective. And it's about working in collaboration with the client and you getting a sense and you making your best judgment as to what's going to work best for the individual. There is some pitfalls to if it fits your macros, just that the individual's diet quality can really slack. And that might be fine at the start of a fat loss phase when if an individual knows what they're doing and they know how to track and stuff like that, that if it fits your macros can be great until body fat levels come down and your body starts to fight against you and your appetite signals start to shoot up. Then we need to be really mindful of the food volume that we're consuming and the amount of fruit and veg that we're eating. And if we solely focus on if it fits your macros, the diet quality that an individual is consuming can be really, really poor. And that might not be helpful for health and for fat loss in the long term as well. So I know I didn't give some like really strict recommendations here. It's about you just working with that individual and just trialing a bunch of stuff. Like you can work through all of these things with an individual. Or also certain nutrition practices can be helpful in certain phases. So maybe during a fat loss approach, using some form of meal plans and if it fits your macros. But then when the individual has achieved their fat loss and they're doing some work at trying to maintain the body weight, then swapping to some mindful eating and a plate method can be really helpful as well. So is exercise even helpful? There seems to be a bit of like a U-shaped bell curve with this, and there's lots of individual variability, so we can't make some really strong general statements, but it seems to be the case that this is what happens. When an individual has excessively low physical activity, then increasing physical activity improves appetite regulation, because low physical activity can dysregulate appetite, leading to overeating and weight gain. So bumping that individual up to moderate levels of physical activity is going to be really helpful. But as we move into the higher levels, it doesn't seem to be as clear, and it actually can be the case that like excessive levels of exercise can drive compensatory eating. And the way I kind of look at this is exercise and cardio is helpful for improving our headspace. It's helpful for stress management and making us feel good. And when we feel good, our decision-making capacity is better. So I don't really care too much about the effects that exercise has on appetite regulation, because it has a bigger effect on executive function or our ability to do the hard things when they're in line with our goals. That's kind of the way I think about things. Now, if an individual is doing excessive amounts of exercise and then we try and like push harder, we try to create more of a deficit by doing even more exercise, that can just continue to drive some even higher appetite and even more compensatory eating. So we can be spinning our wheels there. So you definitely have to find the sweet spot in terms of how much physical activity can the individual do before their appetite just goes through the roof. So one of the biggest levers to pull when it comes to fat loss, and you've heard me say this word loads of times at this stage, it's the caloric density, it's the energy density of foods, because that's what drives the gut distension and the feelings of satiety. So energy density is the energy divided by the volume. So let's say the energy density of peanut butter is 6. The energy density of a blueberry is 0.5. So if we're going to use this model that we know that consuming equivalent calories, let's say we're consuming 100 calories of peanut butter versus 100 calories of blueberries, the blueberries are going to be a lot more satiating. And that's a really important thing. When we look at calorie density, we don't just want to think about individual foods, we want to think about the total calorie density of the meal. So let's say you have a loads of veg, but you also use loads of oil in it as well. It's then you've increased the calorie density of that entire meal, even though you're eating lots of low energy dense foods, but using lots of oil on top of it is going to increase the total energy density of that meal. So something that I use with clients is try and get them to focus on increasing their food weight. We want to see big plates of food. That is going to be a really nice practical way of applying this, is setting the individual the goal of building this 600 calorie or this 500 calorie meal, but make it really heavy. That's essentially what we do. We want to see it be really heavy and really voluminous. As we've spoken about before, the texture of food seems to matter. So we know that potatoes seem to be extremely satiating, and maybe it's due to the texture of them. And as we've discussed, energy density helps with reducing body weight, but also reducing satiety as well, and prospective energy consumption as well. So if we have a meal low in energy density, and then during the next meal we decrease the amount of calories that we're consuming, and over time that's going to be really helpful for managing body weight. So if an individual isn't trying to lose weight, but they're just not trying to gain it, but also for fat loss as well. So does meal timing matter for fat loss? By and large, no. So energy balance and having a calorie deficit supersedes this, but there is some sort of leaning towards two things that contradict each other, which is just the way nutrition is sometimes. So fasting seems to be efficacious in comparison to no intervention at helping individuals decrease their body weight. So fasting is better than doing nothing, because we're just doing something. An individual is putting effort into losing body weight, and that's the main thing. And having a intervention that you can adhere to, fasting, once you get into a routine of it, is relatively easy to adhere to, and that can help you create a calorie deficit. It does seem to be the case that if we look at early eating versus later eating and where the predominance of our calories are, so let's say if we consume the majority of our calories before 2 p.m., so we have big breakfast and big lunch, that we get increased satiety at dinner. And something else that has kind of been debunked as well is this idea that early eating has a higher thermic effect of feeding, so we burn more calories when we eat early in the day. What is happening there is that's just tracking underlying resting metabolic rate. So our resting metabolic rate is higher in the mornings as opposed to the evenings. So it's not the case that calories consumed in the morning have a higher thermic effect of feeding. It's the fact that the resting metabolic rate is higher during the early parts of the day. And it does seem to be the case that self-reports of hunger and satiety are improved when we have that bigger breakfast and lunch. And whether that actually has any long-term effects on weight loss, there is some data suggesting that it is the case. But again, everything works for fat loss. There's nothing inherently special. It's just about finding an intervention that works for the individual. So maybe experimenting with this early eating, or experimenting with fasting, which instead of eating the majority of your calories in the morning, maybe you fast in the morning. It's just about us having some degree of restriction there, and us just having some sort of intervention there. That's what's working. It doesn't really matter too much what it is, to be fair. Because everything works. Everything works as long as we create a way that an individual can be in a deficit and they can adhere to it. So when we're talking about interventions for fat loss, we need to take a step away from nutrition. Everything nutrition we've already covered. Eat plenty of fruits and vegetables to decrease the energy density of your meals. Consume adequate protein. Make sure you're consuming appropriate water, that you're not dehydrated. Make sure that you're not consuming excessive amounts of dietary fat or free sugars, because they're going to increase the energy density. It's just about having a general overall healthy dietary pattern, and then just bumping up your fruits and veg consumption as your appetite increases, as you get further into the deficit, or as you lose more and more body weight, as your body starts to fight against you more and more, just decreasing your calories, but also simultaneously increasing the weight of the meals that you're eating. That's kind of what we're doing here. The next thing that we have to do, the major part, is just managing an individual's headspace, making sure that they're feeling good, that their well-being is okay, because the better we feel, the better our adherence to things, generally speaking. When we don't feel great, it can manifest itself around our health behaviors and the amount of food we're eating and our ability to exercise and stuff like that. So managing an individual's headspace is going to be the most important thing once we have the basics of nutrition in place, which we now do. So helping an individual put behavioral interventions in place, whether it's exercising or play, or make sure that their sleep is good, or practicing some mindfulness, or just generally like keeping up with your responsibilities when you feel like you're not keeping up with them. There's that baseline stress, and that can manifest itself around your eating behaviors. And attempt to rectify some sources of negative emotion in the individual's life. If there's stresses in their life that are controllable, that they can actually do something about, then helping the individual to put a plan in place to rectify them, because they're going to be influencing the individual's fat loss attempt. They really are. Something else that's really important to consider is the frequency of the changes, and also how much of a deficit an individual should be in. And let's say we go anywhere between 10 to 20% of an energy deficit. So if an individual is consuming 2,000 calories as their maintenance calories, anywhere between like 1,600 and 1,800 is going to be perfect for the deficit. And also depending on the amount of body weight that the individual has to lose. So we can be a little bit more aggressive if the individual has a good bit of body weight to lose. Something I don't like doing is making really frequent changes to food and exercise, and like pushing up calories of cardio and pulling down food all of the time. I like to make decent changes really infrequently. So I'll make a change to an individual's calories and steps that's going to allow them to lose fat for the next 6 weeks if they adhere to it perfectly, or 4 weeks, and then I'll modify it again. Particularly with my general population clients, I don't want to be coming in and micromanaging things and changing things every week. I make big changes, and then when that stalls, then I'll make a decent change again. I think it's more psychologically taxing if you're making them changes, if you're removing calories every single week and pushing up the cardio every single week. So that's something that I like to do. So let's say you make one big change at the start. Then the next time you make changes, so let's say the individual is 6 weeks in, you only have to make a small enough adjustment there to keep the ball rolling with fat loss, making sure that an individual's adherence is really good as well. So something else that I like to do as well, depending on the individual's schedule, is pushing up their energy expenditure as opposed to decreasing their food intake. That can, as I said, it can be a source of stress management, and it's less psychologically taxing than continuously pulling an individual's calories down. And then take your time with it. So use refeeds and diet breaks. They can be helpful. They're probably not doing anything special like physiologically, but they're good. They're helpful mentally. And what they tend to do is they do draw out the fat loss. So it's really hard to say that refeeds and diet breaks are going to be more helpful for maintaining muscle mass. Because if we do 6 months and an individual diets for 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off for 6 months, versus we have another group who does 12 weeks of dieting and then 12 weeks at maintenance, who's going to be better at retaining muscle mass in the end of the 6 months? It's both going to be very, very similar. Or if anything, the group that have spent 12 weeks at maintenance may have gained more. So we're really nitpicking here. It doesn't really matter too much. It's about creating an intervention that the individual can adhere to and enjoy. And something that's helpful about adding in refeeds and diet breaks is that you can help the individual practice what it's going to look like when their fat loss is finished and they're going to be sitting at maintenance calories. That's why I use them as well. So an individual can get a feel for, hey, look how much food I can consume of good quality food, and I can be fueling my training and also maintaining my body weight here. That's what I'm trying to get at as well with the refeeds and diet breaks. It's not really about the physiological adaptations, because there might be some, but they don't really matter too much. Something else that can be helpful to do is use the food diary to look at an individual's dietary patterns. Now, I've discussed this at length here in other lectures, so I'm sure you're all very familiar with what we can use these for. What we can do is we can look at an individual's dietary habits and see, like, let's say this individual is noticing that they're overeating in the evening. We can look and be like, okay, well, maybe it's because they're consuming 800 calories throughout the day. So the individual is starving, and that's what's driving the overconsumption. Or maybe on this one, we can see that the individual's food consumption seems to be fairly good throughout the day. They're eating a decent amount of calories, and then they're still eating the entire fridge in the evening. And we can see, okay, well, their mood was lower and they were alone, and we can start to put in some sort of behavioral intervention there to change that. And even just bringing that extra degree of awareness to the client of like, hey, look, this is what's happening in the evening when you're alone. Let's let's try and do something about that. What could we do in the evening that would help there? Something else that I will use very frequently and I'll send on to clients is the satiety index. So essentially it has foods ranked in relation to white bread. So white bread is 100%, and certain foods are like really satiating in comparison to that. So we see like potatoes, porridge, fruits, brown pasta, and then other foods are more hyper-palatable and more less satiating. So we see things like the baked products, let's say, the foods that are like have that nice blend of high dietary fat and refined grains. It's the combination of the concoction of these things that makes a foods hyper palatable and easy to overconsume. So with a hyper palatable food, it's the combination of the sodium levels, the sugar levels, the dietary fat levels, the density of them three, and then this kind of umami texture as well. That doesn't have to be present. It's usually having like three of them things or two of them things in specific ratios that gives hyperpalatable foods their definition. Something else that's really important is helping an individual with their organization, because fat loss comes down to being really organized as opposed to really disciplined. So helping an individual prep their meals and schedule their training times and plan to do things that drive positive emotion for stress management, whether it's being in nature or yoga or reading or swimming or going for a hike. And that's a big thing that we do in coaching, is just help them with the planning and the preparation of these things. Help them find different forms of socializing, because withdrawal isn't an option. You withdraw from if you're used to seeing your friends and you always go for drinks and go for food, and then because you're in a deficit, you just withdraw from them. You don't get the positive emotion of seeing individuals, and you get that degree of like resentment build up that your fat loss is getting in the way of you seeing your friends. So you need to be able to shift how you see your friends. So it's meeting them for a coffee and meeting them for a stroll and going and doing, like if you have friends that go to the gym as well, like you want to shift what you do as your form of socializing, because withdrawal from it isn't an option. And also we can incorporate in food, like meals out and alcohol consumption as well, into a calorie deficit. But finding that balance, if an individual is always socializing, it's going to be stopping them achieving their goals. So we need to find that sweet spot of modifying how they socialize, whilst also simultaneously allowing them to do the normal socializing of eating and drinking and stuff like that, and incorporating that in. It's about working with them to find that balance there. Something that I've noticed across all clients is the individuals who are more focused on goals that are more important to them. So they have business goals and they have career goals and they have family goals and they have training related goals, and their attention is on them things. Fat loss is relatively easy. But when the individual is hyper focused on the only thing they care about is losing weight and they put too much stress on it, that can actually drive them to overconsume calories. So helping an individual think about fat loss becoming as like a byproduct of them just living in line with their values and them looking after their health while they're focusing on other goals, career goals and college goals or whatever it is, or having a training related goal, whether it's being like trying to be as strong as possible or as fit as possible, and just allowing the fat loss to be happening in the background. That's kind of what we're looking for here. Yeah, so that's what I said here exactly. So let fat loss come as a result of becoming preoccupied with other more important goals. Because yeah, your fat loss might be important to you, but there's other more important things that you should also be focusing on, and they can be big drivers of positive emotion, and they can actually help with our nutrition adherence. Something that's really popular online is this idea of calorie bragging, where an individual is like, well, look at the fat loss my client achieved, and they were eating 2,000 calories a day and they were socializing and stuff like that. And by and large, if that's true, which it can be, maybe the individual is like, one, hasn't really lost that about very much fat, or they're doing excessive amounts of cardio, or something's going on, or the individual is quite heavy in body weight and that's why they can do it. If you're working with a female who is really short and relatively light and they're sedentary, they're going to be consuming low calories. They're going to be uncomfortably low. And maybe in that case, you want to help, if an individual is already really lean, maybe you want to like help them focus on body recomposition, where you don't put them in a deficit and you just help them focusing on building muscle mass. But if the individual is adamant that they want to get leaner, then you're going to have to, if you can't increase their physical activity, you're going to have them eating like 1,200 calories, or like, yeah, 1,200 calories, maybe like 1,100 calories. Like, it's just the reality of it. I would be reluctant to do it would be trying to shift an individual's mindset towards, let's do some recomposition. If an individual is 55 kilos, there's not, well, like, I can't see any reason why an individual would want to lose more weight. But if they do, if they have a specific goal, or if they don't really have much muscle mass, they actually could have a little bit of body fat at this level, at this body weight. So helping them shift the focus towards building muscle mass whilst losing a bit of fat, whilst sitting at maintenance calories, that's a good idea. But if an individual is adamant that they want to pull off a little bit of body fat, you're going to have to, like, the calories are going to be quite low. And you shouldn't feel like you're doing anything wrong when you have an individual in a circumstance like this. Now, if you have a female who's 80 kilos and moderately active, then there will be no need for the calories to be that low. But they might be down at, like, towards the end of a fat loss phase, maybe they are down at 1,500 and 1,400 calories, and that's to be expected. Absolutely. So when it comes to the most important practical application things from a nutrition perspective, it's find out the meals that an individual eats most frequently, so meals that they eat relatively consistently, and look at how can we modify the energy density of them meals. What can we do here to increase the protein in them, decrease the dietary fat and the sugars in them, increase the fruit and veg in them. And doing that with the meals that they consume most frequently is going to be the biggest thing we do when it comes to nutrition from fat loss. And helping them plan some 2-minute meals. So when they come in from work and they're tired and they're hungry and they're stressed, and that's a situation that usually drives overeating, we want some 2-minute meals here. Maybe it's the prepackaged meals or the frozen meals that they can stick in the microwave and eat. And they're kind of like, these 2-minute meals are going to be really helpful for an individual eating in line with their calorie goal during periods when they're tired and stressed and not arsed, really. And then leaving some protein powder and fruit and work as well is going to be helpful for making sure the individual isn't snacking too much throughout the day. Anyway, that is it for me on this fat loss lecture. Hopefully this was helpful, and I shall chat to you all soon. Cheers, guys.